On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Kulwinder Verma Scott. She is the Global VP of Talent Acquisition at the Trade Desk. We're going to be talking about moving beyond the actual process of the job and focusing more on the business. I know we all have to focus on the process, it's part of the job, but how do you go above and beyond? How do you look at things differently? And how do you sometimes say, no, not now? I'm super excited, Cully, to have you on the show. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, Amir. It's really great to be here. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, I know people have probably heard of the Trade Desk or might be familiar with the name, but I just want to make sure everyone knows what you guys do before we dive in.
Look, I'll put it this way. At its best, the internet is an open marketplace of ideas, content, commerce. Our intention is to keep it that way. So what we've created is an independent media buying platform. It's designed for the open internet. It helps marketers reach more customers in more places, gives them transparency, gives them choice, all the way through to their objective, which is getting good marketing coming through, selling their products, and essentially generating revenue. So that's our role in this. And we're really focused on ensuring that everybody has access to get the right data that they need to make the right informed decisions.
I love it. That's a great place to be, and I'm sure there's a lot of moving parts, and that falls partially in your lap because you have to support the business. This episode, when we were chatting, we were talking about talent acquisition and process, right? I think anyone who's internal, external is very comfortable with process when it comes to TA. We all follow it. We all love to make sure that we're sticking by it because it's important, right? Otherwise, we don't function. But obviously, we talked about there are situations that when you want to move further in your career, and actually, if you're already further in your career, you want to make a business impact. We talk about that seat at the table. And I think from that conversation, we started talking about the seat of the table really is, are you contributing at a business and an impact level? I guess when you are looking at managing process, it is essential. Can you actually divest? Like, obviously, you have to manage process and you want to focus on the business. They're almost like two different lenses, two different contexts that sometimes are very expensive to switch between.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Look, process is at the heart of providing a really efficient and streamlined process, both to the business and also to external talent that you're talking to. So we can't get away from just how important and critical that is to get it right. But I do think where the value add comes in around the business conversation is when you're sitting in front of those hiring managers and business leaders, trying to understand what it is about this new role that they want to add to their team as an example. You've really got to think about, well, how am I going to position that out there in the market when I'm trying to engage people? How am I going to tell the story of our company? Where is it going? What impact will this role have on that journey? And the best way to do that is to understand the story of the company and the business that you're in. Process is very easy to learn. It's very easy to explain to the business. We take step 1 through 5. This is when the business becomes involved. Then the recruiting team takes back over. We take the candidate to offer. You can walk through that process really easily. But when it comes to really describing the essence of value that this role is going to have for the individual you're trying to bring in, that's where it becomes important to understand the story as your hiring manager or business leader might tell it. And the best way to do that is to ask questions. Curiosity sounds pretty basic, but it would be shocking to know how quickly, when you're working in talent acquisition, it becomes easy to fall into this process-oriented role and not ask those questions and just accept what you're being told versus asking that, well, why does it work that way? And what happens when you do X? And what will this role, add value to in the process of the day-to-day? What are we adding into the organization by bringing this role in? What's our long-term goal here as a team? And how will you position this when a candidate comes to speak to you? So the more you can understand that from the perspective of the business, the better positioned you'll be when you are talking to candidates, because you're connecting with them, not just on a tell me about the things you've done in your role, but you can actually talk about what the business is doing and how connected you are to that mission. So that's where I would say that it's very difficult to do two things in the same conversation, but you'll always find more engagement from your business leader when you're prepared to be curious, because they do love talking about what they do.
When you're going through the process side, obviously there's a lot of different little minutia that we have to deal with, follow-ups, approvals. There's a lot of little things that end up taking a lot of time that take focus. Some of it is busy work, but you've got to do it. I guess when you're looking at asking some of these questions, and obviously you get intake meeting, and you can go beyond that. You can go follow up with the manager. I mean, hopefully they'll make time for you. But as you're kind of looking at trying to have those two different hats, so your talent on one side, we have the functional business leader or technical business leader on the other side. They are seeing you as a person that's following up with their process. They're potentially like, hey, this person's bugging me about these things. And then on the flip side, we're going to go, hey, by the way, I'd like to sit here and question you about, the why and the how and the if, which is fine. I think everyone should be asking those questions. Sometimes I think it represents a conflict of how we're perceived by the hiring manager in terms of, well, one day you are nagging me and questioning me about, why I've not filled out, this XYZ scorecard. And the next day you want to understand how we're doing things. And I think sometimes, I guess the perception from the outside in is a little bit difficult.
You're right. It absolutely is. I generally work with the intention with my teams is don't let that first time interaction with the hiring manager be when you've got a job. Right. And now that can be easy to say when you work in a much smaller organization. Your accessibility to the business is much easier than if you're working in a larger organization where your general interactions are fairly limited. You're never going to be able to catch every hiring manager, but you'll generally get a sense of what are the trends, what teams are hiring the most. And the best way to get around this sort of push-pull scenario of being process-oriented versus being business curious is to try and have those conversations sometimes separately, right? And so I look at it as, think about each moment you're working on these roles as a mini onboarding, right? You want to go in, you want to understand what the team does, how are they structured, what's the important things that they focus on, how is success measured? And so if that's not the first time you're seeing the business, now they've already had that conversation with you. So when you do go in and say, looks like you're ready to hire a role, you've got something to refer back to. Remember when we had that conversation and you said X, how does that relate to this job here? I know I'm taking a little bit of liberty here to talk about it in the sense of it feels like a privilege that you've even had that time with that hiring manager in the first place before a job has become available for you to work on. But it really is, how do you perceive your role as a partner versus perceiving yourself as a service provider? And that, for me, is where the friction really comes together, is how do the TA function perceive who they are? And then how does that translate to who the business is? I don't think of myself or my team as processors or just TA people who are filling jobs. I refer to my teams as partners, and I refer to my hiring managers when I'm talking to them about my team. This person's going to partner with you. So straight off the bat, we're taking away this service-oriented hierarchy that can often exist between sort of that business TA function, and reminding the team you are experts in your space, but your hiring managers are experts in their space. So how do we bring the two together so that you can collectively tell a great story?
Yeah, I actually think that's really great advice. And I think as you were speaking, I was reflecting on most hiring managers have probably at some point engaged with a consulting organization to come in. And during that engagement, there's a pre-sales portion of it where they're doing a lot of solution discussion. They're being asked 1,000,000,001 questions. And then once the actual SOW signed, then the works, they're still being asked 1,000,000,001 questions. I do think they're very used to this. I think what you just mentioned, as you introduce your team as talent partners and how the talent leader sets the tone over that engagement, because a lot of times a hiring manager might not have ever spoken to somebody in the talent team, and the talent team has very little visibility, and they have to quickly, within one conversation, ramp up on what that manager wants, understand their piece of the business. And we can't do that for everybody and every hiring manager. But I guess as you're kind of looking at your team and you want them to be talent partners, how proactive can you be? Because obviously you can't go, hey, let's go survey every manager, every department. That's not possible. But you want them to have maybe a baseline, or you want them to be ready to go in that conversation, or at least a starting point. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because you're right. You can't talk to every hiring manager and be ready in the moment that you're needed to be. I put a lot of emphasis on peer learning. So when you think about the teams in general, I look across my team, we have a variety of tenure across our organization. The trade desk has grown pretty rapidly over the last several years, and there are people that have been here through that rapid growth, and as such have probably experienced more than one area and department. Peer learning is huge. So if there's an opportunity to in team learn about the history, the context, you're not then going into any conversation cold, right? You've got something in your sort of backpack of ideas and thoughts that you can actually springboard off to start a conversation. And sometimes it really is as basic as, how long have you been here? How are you settling in? Tell me about the role. Was it what you thought it was going to be? And we just need to connect human to human. I think if you go in as well, I've got this checklist of questions I must get answered before I leave this room, we've kind of missed the point of the partnership, because the partnership really is just a human to human connection. And there just happens to be the topic of the team, the company, and what they do. But the person you're talking to is a human being. So let's connect on that level. But that doesn't mean that you can't, as a TA professional, go in somewhat equipped with some history and context. And that's what we do with my team. Buddy systems, connecting people who've been here for a while, who can tell you the story and the history of what's happened. As I onboarded, I did the same thing. I went on a little journey around the company and I was like, you've been here X amount time longer than me. What don't I know that I should? And those are the things that I think, as I encourage my team to do and position themselves as talent partners, start where it's easily accessible. And that's within your own team.
Yeah, as you were kind of mentioning, you obviously being onboarded and you went on the tour of the company, understand as many hiring managers. What does your relationship look like with the people team? Because obviously on the TA side, your job is to bring people in, have them take there's a handoff to the other side of your counterparts. And obviously they have different objectives, they have different mechanisms, they have different tools, they have their ears are slightly positioned differently to the ground. But obviously they might have different longer term relationships with certain hiring managers. Like, how does that relationship? Because I think what I kind of am hearing is we need more ambassadors to talk to these hiring managers so we're prepared. And I'm like, oh well, the people team seem like they already have a lot of this intel. How does that relationship work?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm incredibly proud of in our organization is that unity that we have with our people team. As we evolve as an organization, our roles have intrinsically shifted, and how we work together has had to shift in terms of how our company's growing and how we're evolving. But one of the things that I personally pride myself on, and I know my teams do too, is the partnership that we have with our people advocates, our people solutions teams, our engagement teams, our people enablement teams, really so that we all understand the symbiosis, nature of our roles. Yes, we bring them in, but we still need to partner really closely to make sure they continue to be successful, that we can continue to look at, hey, how effective was that hiring decision? Did we hire the right people? And then what are the learnings if there were some mishaps, right? And we're only going to hear that from the people team through our partnerships with them. And it takes time to understand the genesis of each person's role and how it all fits in. A lot of the work that we've been able to do is a lot of cross-collaboration work. So when it comes to everything from how do we run an internal transfer process to what is the handover from hire through to onboard, it's a cross collaboration of work. So it's not done in silos. Everybody's hearing each other's perspective so that we can create those joins that dovetail really nicely so that the individual coming into the organization experiences no friction at all. And it's a seamless onboarding. I don't know that that's true of every company and every organization. I've been very blessed and lucky enough that the companies I've worked at, I've worked in an environment where TA and HR have been stuck at the hip. And, we are one team. And if we're both in the room, we're talking. But if one of us is in the room, we're representing the other in the best way that we can, with the exception of those incredibly sensitive situations. But for the most part, we should be able to connect the dots for one another and bring those conversations together. So it's one thing I'm incredibly proud of the work that we're doing here, that our teams feel that way.
You mentioned, obviously, talking to your team, both you and the hiring manager, they're experts in their own areas. At times, there are situations where there might be subtleties of disagreement, not being eye to eye. Those are always challenging because obviously, we're in service of the business. But when you get to the situations where the talent team and the hiring manager don't see eye to eye. I mean, obviously no one wants to say no, but you might not be able to exactly do what's being asked, or, there might be some repercussions for your team. I mean, how do you handle those situations in that partnership to make sure, your team's well represented and still in service of the hiring manager?
Yeah, great question. I can imagine that every TA professional feels this on a daily basis, not in a negative way by any means, but just the very natural friction of hiring managers want to move fast. They need to hire for their teams. They need somebody on board right away. They want to do this, this, and this. It's not in line with what you've told them that you can do. I generally, and with my teams, generally work with the view that we can find a win-win situation. But the important thing is to understand context and the why. So unless there are some legal reasons why we cannot do something or what have you, generally speaking, there's always a way to figure out a pathway forward. Just because two approaches might be different doesn't mean you're not both after the same goal. And that's where that conversation comes in of, well, help me understand your perspective. What are you trying to get to? Let's see how else we can do this. And let me help explain why this way may not be the optimal way to go. There are often times where you will have the conversation that says, okay, we'll do it your way, but under these constraints, right? Let's try it. One of the beauties of a company the size of the Trade Desk is you can go try new things, right? You're not bound by this rigor of, you must do it this way and it must fit into this box. Not at all. We love piloting. We love giving things a try. If it doesn't work, we've learned something. And so the approach that we've generally taken, it's rarely an outright no. It might be a not at this moment. It might be a no or yes, we can try that. However, let's do this as well. So I think it's the art of negotiation. And it ultimately depends on what it is you're trying to get at the end of it. The bottom line, I think, that I spend my time constantly reminding our business partners of is we're all going for the same goal, right? We're not at odds. Nobody's against one another here. We're both going to the same place. We might be on different yellow brick roads, but we're going to the same place. So how do we find that point in the middle where we come together?
I love that. I live in Southern California, and sometimes I used to live on the East Coast, and there are times wherever you live, you might see a main highway and then you see a side access road. When you said the two yellow brick roads, I'm like, oh my God, that's the analogy, is that there's this highway and there's the side access road. For some reason, they never merge. They just run parallel for miles.
Yeah.
And I think what you said is really interesting, because I think, in listening to you, and my personal belief is that talent is a solution provider. I actually think they're a service provider as any other one that exists in the business, and they can solve problems within their domain. And this may be a question I'm going to start asking every leader, but this kind of fits with what you've been talking about. Is there is a stigma of talent is not a solution provider. That is like it's sometimes not fun to talk about, but I actually feel it. Like I can, I'm an ex-engineer. I really don't belong in the engineering world because it's been a long time since I've coded. So I align with the talent community, and I kind of look at that and I can hear and feel it in conversations. That stigma, I don't think is fair. We're not going to change it on this conversation. I'm not pretending we are. But I'm just curious your thoughts, because everything you just said sounds like your team is a consulting entity. You guys are solution providers. How do we, or how have you in your company maybe help shift that viewpoint that, hey, that old stigma of talent is process, but hey, we're business partners, we're solution providers. How have you gone to change that image?
So I just want to be clear, we are not 100% there as an organization. We are on a journey, and it's a very early journey for us too. You know, if I think through the trajectory I've been through and the experiences I've had in those companies coming into the trade desk, that's the journey we're going on here too. So it would be remiss of me to say, hey, that there is still a large portion here of where we're seen as the no gang, right? Well, TA always telling me, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. When actually, when you take a step back and peel back the conversation, nobody ever said no. It's more about what was heard in that moment, because the person receiving that message wasn't getting a resounding yes. So when they're not getting a resounding yes, the assumption is it's a no. But maybe they didn't finish listening to the conversation. And so, you know, we are by no means where we want to be, but we are slowly but surely, step by step, showcasing our value as partners, showcasing the way that we can coach or mentor or advise our clients, our business partners. And so it takes time, because what you're talking about there, this stigma that exists, it's decades old. And it's a mile deep. And so, to your point, we're not going to change that on today's podcast, but it also is, you're trying to shift a tanker here. And the more we can showcase that value through these business-led conversations versus tell me about the 10 things you want in the candidate you want to hire, it starts shifting that perception. Well, actually, I can have a different conversation with my TA partner. They're asking me the questions that actually nobody else around me is asking. And that's the important thing. Our curiosity as TA professionals should be the kind of curiosity that gets our hiring managers and business partners to think differently. But if we're not asking them questions that challenge them or get them thinking, then we're just back to that process and order taking. There are moments where that is appropriate. So I don't know that you can live in this 100% consulting capacity. There are times where you literally do just have to go in and say, what do you need? But it's the balance to find in that I think is the most important. And I'm excited for those journeys that so many in our industry are going on. But I also recognize in solidarity, it is hard, because you are one to many and you're trying to change many minds and previous experiences, right? And that's the hardest thing. People have triggers. People have their own biases. So I think all of that plays a role.
I love that. I agree. I draw the analogy. I've brought this up a couple times, and cybersecurity has gone through this evolution. I've seen it. I have friends who are cybersecurity professionals. They have gone through this shift in that stigma. They've gone through in relabeling. And I mentioned the term shifting left. And I think sometimes I talk about it on podcasts without maybe everyone knowing what that means in the security world. And it means basically moving closer towards the business problem, right? And let's get closer to the area where the development's happening, business problems are being solved, not at the end where a lot of decisions have been made. And I think, I've mentioned it a couple times, but I like the idea of talent shifting left earlier in the process, early in those discussions, because I think what you just said to me is what we do. It's just done not without, some of these common terms that maybe hiring managers understand. And I think sometimes we have different terms, we have different constructs, some of those processes are foreign. But yeah, it does seem like a very large glacier that has to be steered, and it needs to become an iceberg, and then we can start seeing shifts. But I love what you guys are doing. It sounds like, what I really like is when it's cognizant to the team. They're aware of the shift. They're aware of how to start focusing on those higher value things. So I think I love everything you've said, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing. And not going to change the world, but hopefully every conversation will start getting people just to think, hey, how do I go into my company and start becoming a solution provider to my hiring managers?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I really appreciate you having me on your podcast today. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. If somebody wants to reach out to you, we did not cover everything in as much detail as possible in an episode, but if somebody does want to reach out to you, what is a good way of connecting with you?
Best way would be via LinkedIn. So I think you have my LinkedIn link that you can offer people. So
we will. I'll make sure it's out there. People will hopefully reach out to you and follow up with you. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I really love this conversation. I think, talking more about that talent as a solution provider is not just the label. I think it's a real thing. And I think we all do it. It's just not properly understood sometimes. And I think Kelly did a fantastic job of explaining how they do things within their company and their journey. I think it's still a journey. So I appreciate it. Share it with somebody else who might enjoy the conversation. I'd appreciate that. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.